Are you feeling the excitement for the Float Conference? I am, because I just had a amazing conversation with now Dr. Flux, which was, as always, incredibly insightful, very personal, and super exciting to dive into brain science. So please join us today. And of course, join us for the Float Conference, August 18th through the 20th. We're less than a month out. Definitely get your tickets, and we'll see you out there. Dr. Flux and I will both be there to give hugs and talk float. And I guess in Dr. Flux's case, talk float science and brain science, of course. So please join us for this episode. Absolutely engaging, personal, very cool episode, and see you at the Float Conference. I do also want to give a shout out to HelmBot. Do you accept tips at your float center? Do you want to accept tips at your float center? Now HelmBot not only allows you to add tips on, but it allows you to customize the options so that the customer doesn't have to do any math and they can just click a percentage and they're good to go. And it's just one more thing that HelmBot is doing. It's going to make your life easier if you own HelmBot already. If you don't, if you're not already signed up, then go to helmbot.com and check out what they have to offer. You're going to be able to schedule your float tanks, schedule your employees, your staff. You're going to be able to keep an entire running logbook discussion. It's very rare all of your employees are going to be in the same space at the same time. So it's as if they are able to. They're able to have an ongoing conversation, as well as a float manual in there, keeping the metrics for your float tanks. It's an incredible piece of software, highly recommended. And it's not just for float tanks. It's if you have yoga classes, LMTs who are getting tips, for example. It's all accessible, all there for you. Again, go to helmbot.com to check them out. Also, the FTA has been working hard, really excited about the FTA. Always doing webinars, roundtables. There's just one on having first-time guests and how to connect with them after the float as well. And that is now online. You can check that out. So it's even if you're not able to make it, which is always the best, right? To be able to get there, ask questions, have an engaging conversation. But if you're not able to, the information isn't gone. If you're a member, you have access to all the previous webinars, all the previous roundtables. It's fantastic. Also, the Float Conference coming up, the FTA is a part of it as well. Of course, they're going to be there, but also Saturday night, if you're part of the FTA, there's an FTA members-only mixer, so that's going to be really fun. So join the party, be part of that. And really excited. It's been going on for, gosh, I don't know how long, but it feels like an eternity. But the microbiology project for the FTA is actually going to be presented for everybody by Dr. Roy Vore. So I'm really excited about that. This is information all of us are going to want to be there for. So I'll be there for that and excited to view the results for the first time with the rest of you. So wahoo, super exciting. I should also mention that they are now accepting applicants to join the board for the FTA. So if you want to make a difference for your community, go to flotation.org and go ahead and apply. Go ahead and check it out. Sign up if you're not part of the email blasts. Otherwise, if you are, there's a link in the email. But yeah, check it out. And again, make a difference for the community. Super cool. And yeah, I guess that's about it, right? Let's go and start the pod. Welcome back to another episode of Art of the Float, where float centers thrive. I'm Dylan. I own the Float Shop in Portland, Oregon. It's just me hosting today, and I am so lucky to have the infamous, famous, the incredible Doctor.
God, am I infamous?
Depends who you ask.
I guess so.
Dr. Flux is with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dylan. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. All on this side as well. I'm really happy to have a just one-on-one chat with you today, leading up to the Float Conference. Flux will be talking at the Float Conference, and we'll get to that in a little bit here. But for anybody, if it's possible that somebody doesn't know who Dr. Flux is, can you talk a little bit about how you are associated with and a part of the float industry?
Yeah, so when I started grad school, which was, oh God, a lot of years ago now, I had a crazy thing in grad school happen where I didn't have a project and didn't have a mentor all of a sudden in my first year, and I met this amazing scientist named Dr. Chris Lowry, who became my PhD advisor, and I needed a project to do over the summer. And so he was like, well, I'm doing this collaboration with this guy named Dr. Justin Feinstein, and we need someone to analyze a bunch of float data, and can you do that? And I was like, okay, sure. And they kind of gave me this project that they thought was going to take me all summer, and I ended up doing it in a weekend. and they were like, wait a second, who are you?
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't know. A guy who likes statistics. And it wouldn't be for another year when I would go to my first float conference. So that was 2017. Then 2018, I went to my first float conference, and that I'm a graphic designer and an illustrator and an artist. I mean, if you really ask me who I am, I tend to say artist before I say scientist. But I made this very engaging cartoon presentation about floating and the immune system. And the entire float community took me in as its own, and every year since, I have come back and given a crazy, colorful, fun talk about science and floating, and now I'm a float person.
A beloved
I have my
float person.
PhD. I have my
Yeah,
PhD now.
yeah.
I finished. I defended my dissertation in 2021. I finished my clinical internship in 2022. I am officially Dr. Flux now, and this will be my second conference officially as Dr. Flux. So that's exciting.
I think it was during your defense. I got to listen in on that, right? That was open for people to listen into.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Everybody listened.
I was fixing a float tank while that was going on. It was very apropos to floating and the community and everything. I was like, yep, this makes sense. Of course, a float tank is down, and I'm wrenching on it here. Big congratulations again. I know we've talked about that in the past. And by the way, to learn more about Flux and Flux's history, becoming a doctor, and just personal history, life history, everything has been covered on previous episodes. I highly recommend them. I think they're some of the most entertaining talks we've had. And which is kind of fun is, I mean, we're so float centric that it is kind of fun that we get to explore other topics with Dr. Flux as well. So check out those really entertaining episodes. But today I would love to talk a little bit more about, I mean, of course, again, we'll talk about your talk, but what's been going on with your life between the last time we recorded. I think you still said there was some caveat where you weren't quite doctor yet. And I understand you were being sensitive about that and professional, but in all of our minds, you definitely were Dr. Flux right then. And maybe it was like another month or two, but between then and now, what's been going on with your life and how are you?
Yeah. Oh man, how am I? So this all kind of feeds into the talk that I'm giving this year.
Oh wow,
So this is
great! Wow.
This is,
glad we planned that out.
This is a story, man. This is where I told you, I was like, "Do you want to get weird on this podcast?"
And I said yes.
So yeah, and you said yes. So here we are. So yeah. So like, I don't know. I definitely had quite the identity crisis when I finished my PhD. Because like I said before, I really identify more as an artist than I do as a scientist. I mean, I am a scientist, obviously. Like, I have a double PhD in neuroscience and clinical psychology. That's like not really in question here. But like, but I finished grad school and I was just like, I don't want to go into academia. I don't, I think I spent a year as a clinical psychologist working with indigenous populations in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that was one of the biggest privileges I ever could have had. But it really also taught me that like, being a clinician is also not really something that makes sense for me. I think with my own mental health, which I'll actually get to, it was a lot. I think taking care of other people and having to take care of myself, especially in the populations that I'd want to work with, because if I were to be a clinician, I wouldn't want to just be like helping rich people with depression. I mean, rich people with depression still need help, but like, I think that I would want to be working in the communities that I was working with in, community mental health, working, continuing to work with indigenous populations. And that work is hard. And I just, I don't know if I have the fortitude for that. I think that like what I really learned from that experience was like, I don't know, these people deserve help, and I don't know if I'm the person to do it. And I think that was a really, really hard choice to make, to kind of recognize your own limitations and be like, oh, like this is really not like, I mean, I did a good job. I had several supervisors when I decided to just take a step away from being a clinician. They were just like, you could do this. And it was a recognition where I could do it, but I don't know what my life would be if I did it, because I realized that like my entire life would be about supporting myself in that job. I would have no extra bandwidth for
Uh-huh.
anything. It
Right.
would all be like helping people and then like, helping myself to help other people.
Right.
And and even at that, like I think I would have gotten burned out like within 2 to 3 years. Like it's just because I mean, my father died while I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Mhm.
and it triggered, which I'll talk a little bit about, but like my mental health isn't a secret, especially now that I'm not a clinician. But like, I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. My lived experience with mental health is like all over the place. But when my father died, it triggered a very severe mood episode, and I was able to continue working through it. But like the price that I had to pay to continue working through it was everything, right? Like my entire life just turned into survival and helping my patients, and I
Sure.
was just like, I can't do this. Um, so I had quite an identity crisis after grad school. Um, because I'm just like, okay, I just spent 6 years of my entire life preparing myself for like several careers that I don't really want now.
Yeah.
Um, and and on top of that, like I think my mental health was just in quite a state that was a lot, and I got to this point where I was just like, okay, we have to. It is time to redefine who you are in your life. Like you need another reboot. And I was telling someone about this at the time, and they were like, "Oh, is that like one of those 7 year cycles?" And I was like, "No, it's not." And then I looked back at my life, and I was like, "Oh, wait a second, I kind of do this every 7 years, don't I?"
Damn
Because
it,
I
it's so
looked at it, I
real.
was just, yeah, I was like, "Damn it!" I was like, so when I was um, I mean, there are corollaries at 7 and 14, but then at age 21 was the year that I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I had to
Mm.
completely redefine my entire life and figure out how to, who I was going to be after that. And then at age 28 was when I decided that I was going to go to grad school. And like the thing
Mm.
was, is that I had already been in a PhD program before that. Like when I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, I was like, I'm going to be a scientist. I'm going to move to New York, and I went to NYU, and I was in a neuroscience PhD program at NYU, and then that ended with one of the top like most disastrous mood episodes of my life.
Oh
I
wow.
never finished the PhD. I ended up
Mm.
I barely made it out alive. That's a whole story. And so at age 28, when I decided that I was going to go back to grad school, I was like, you cannot do that again. Like if you're going to do grad school again this time, you have to figure out how to manage your mental health and who you are and your life so that you don't have an utter complete collapse.
Right.
And so at age 28 was like this big year of me like diving deep into like who I am, and um also like how I managed my own mind in ways that I really firmed up and made so that I was able to then go on to CU Boulder and do a PhD program and finish, a double PhD program with with whatever, grace and aplomb. I don't know. Um, but
Absolutely.
so so this time around I was just like, okay, like who are you, and like what are you doing in this world? And I feel like we don't always ask ourselves that question enough, and it kind of really started out around the question of my mental health, which was because one of the things that I had done in the background of all this, like I said, I have a bipolar diagnosis, but like my lived experience is pure chaos, and it's taken me many years to really understand the way that my mood works.
Mm.
And to do so, I engaged in a 7 year self study. So between 2012 and 2019, I tracked my mood and behavior every
Yes.
single day. I think I've talked about this before.
Yes.
Um, and by the final year, I was tracking like 125 different items every day. And I have my tattoo. This tattoo is a commemoration of each year. So the width of each band corresponds to the number of items that I tracked each
Oh my
year.
gosh. Wow. Okay. It grew.
um, it
I
and
can barely track my caloric intake daily, let alone that's incredible.
caloric intake was there. I mean, the last like couple of years had caloric intake. I mean, I tracked everything. I mean, I tracked every single possible mood you could think of: exercise, sleep, medications, drugs, like everything
It's almost like you're into
was in there.
statistics. It
Yeah, I
seems to
know,
turn your
right? Like
crank.
who
Interesting.
knows? So so a lot of this was like, well, okay, so you've done all this work, and I stopped in 2019, and I said, well, maybe the first thing to do is to really integrate that work into the way that you conceptualize yourself. And that was something that I had never done before, because when I did a lot of higher level statistics, I actually started to identify some really interesting patterns.
Hmm.
Um, and so I decided, well, you know what, I'm gonna read up on what the current neuroscience prevailing theory is on emotion, and and see what that has to say and how that aligns with the work that I've done. So I read, it's a popular book, but it's very intensely neuroscience. It's called How Emotions Are Made. And it is written by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she is one of the prevailing scholars on neuroscience of emotions today. And she has innovated the constructed theory of human emotion. And when I started reading this book, I realized that the work that I had done had, like, by convergent evolution, completely paralleled all of her work.
Oh, interesting.
Which is really, I mean, I could talk about this for a while. I won't get into it for time, but like basically, like the idea of how emotions are constructed. Emotions are made up of multiple components. We don't really think about them this way, but they are actually constructions. They're made up of a homeostatic driver, an affect-based system, and then a context-based system. And the affect system was literally something that I statistically deduced from my own data on myself.
Oh my God. Okay.
So like I was reading this book, and I'm just like, holy shit. I was
Yes.
like, this is literally how I conceptualize my mind. And I did it in parallel to this like really amazing scholar. And so I was like, okay, we're gonna like rewrite the like subroutines of your brain so that they align with this entire neuroscience theory to help to align the way that I manage my mental health and my life. But then as I kept reading the book, I started to realize that this wasn't just like a theory of emotion. This is actually a theory of reality. And that would take a lot longer to explain. But basically,
it's a big bomb to drop.
Yeah. I realized that like this like, you know, 7-year cycle in my life wasn't just about like rewriting the way that I engage with my world and my emotions. It's literally going to be rewriting the code of how I perceive reality itself.
And so when you said it was, you said reality. You didn't say perceived reality the first time. Are you talking about perceived reality the whole time?
I'm talking about perceived reality, right? I mean, like, okay. I don't know. From my perspective, we can never know what reality is. Like, reality is always seen through a lens darkly. Like, we are using a dirty lens through our senses to understand reality. So, like, what is reality? Who knows? But like, we perceive reality, and therefore we construct our reality, and therefore the way that we construct our reality is something that we have some level of control over.
All right.
And so I started to go into the techniques that I have developed over years, which is like, I don't know, have I talked about how I can induce psychedelic experiences without psychedelics before on the show? Was that in the last show?
I feel like I would remember that. It's possible. But no, I don't think so. Please.
Yeah, so I learned that I could do this somewhere around 2012. What?
Was this through breathing technique?
No, this is, I actually use, so it's this weird hack that occurs through the have you ever heard of frisson?
I don't think so.
So frisson is like the technical term for like goosebumps that you hear when you hear music. You feel when you hear music, like you know that feeling when you like are really into music and like you like really get into it.
I do. Like I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like most of us in this community know exactly what that is. So sometime around 2010, I learned that I could hack it, and I could basically, when I have that state, push myself through it and take myself into a psychedelic state. When I figured this out back in 2000, I learned about it. I first started experiencing it in 2010. In 2012, I realized that it was like a backdoor into my mind. And I started using it for information processing. So like I realized that I could like go into this state and have access to like all of this other information in my brain that I didn't realize was in there, like memories, data, and I could use that state as like a hyper processing state. But the problem with that was that I started using it all the time,
Hmm.
and it basically broke my brain and triggered one of the worst mood episodes of my life.
Oh,
And then I
wow.
ended up in a psych ward for a week.
Okay. And would you attribute that like similarly to as if you were doing a bunch of psychedelics over and over again, or any kind of drug use over and over
We are
again?
actually getting to this, but yes.
Okay. 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 Then
um,
I'll just listen. Great.
yeah. So, well, because this all ties into my talk for the
All
Float
right.
conference this
Beautiful.
year.
Chef's kiss.
So I, so basically 2012, I pushed this to its boundaries. I learned the limits and
Hmm.
I pushed past them. I wound up in a psych
Hmm.
ward twice that year. It was not good. And I took a step back. And then over the years since 2012 up until now, I use it very, I don't know. It's like a touch and go thing. Like I'll go into it, I'll do a couple shifts, I'll move back out of it. Because the thing that it's really helped me to realize, and especially this past year, is that like psychedelics are really, reality construct rearrangers. They allow us to utilize these substances to reorganize our perception of our world, and that
Hmm.
can happen for the positive, or that can happen for the negative, and more on the negative in a little bit, but we're still on the positive right now.
Sure.
So I started really, I've been using these techniques for a while now. Like it's almost like I never refer to myself as a psychonaut because I don't use psychedelics that frequently, but like I do
Uh-huh.
use this technique fairly frequently. So I've
Yeah.
become kind of like a micro psychonaut. I don't know what you want to call it. Um, but so over the course of the month of December, I started doing all of these like micro architectural changes to my perception of reality. And so like I would dive into my psyche, I would like basically pulse this ability, and I would start to rearrange things so that they started to align with this basis for this constructed theory of reality that is, the underlying concept for this book, how emotions are made.
Okay.
um and Wow. That triggered the most fundamental shift in my perception that I have ever experienced in my life. Um, and Some for the amazing, and
Hmm.
some for the worse. And I think that that's like this journey was again another kind of cautionary tale about shifting our perception of reality, around how, in many ways, there's a lot of positive that can come from that. Like, I think from December and January, I was just like journaling constantly as like my thought patterns were just starting to shift in ways that were making the world make sense in different ways that was amazing. And then, like, as we kept going, like, it just started to go off the rails. Um, and like
In what
by
way? I'm sorry.
Well, so this whole experience has helped me to understand psychosis a lot better. One way to think about psychosis, and I don't say this as a clinician, I say this as myself, just so that we can differentiate. But
Okay.
like, as someone who has experienced psychosis and has been trying to understand what it is, psychosis in some ways is kind of like when your construct of reality has just gone off the rails, where I think about the way that we perceive reality as as a systematic system of weights on how we weight sensory information. And like, we only have a half hour, so I don't know if I'll get into that. Buy me a drink and I'll talk about that at the conference.
Perfect.
But
All right. Sounds good.
but like, basically, for me, my experience of psychosis is when I start weighting sensory information in ways that like does not align with my own survival or with the reality that I'm trying to live with. And so what that can it's kind of hard to explain really
Is there an
succinctly.
example you can use to
Okay,
demonstrate it?
so we can talk about when this really went off the rails. I was in LA, and I did a weed edible, and I had a psychotic break, and I thought that I was the Antichrist
Wow.
for a couple of days.
Oh,
My
wow.
my
Okay.
now my saving grace from this was that it was so textbook that there was a part of my mind that was like, no, everybody thinks they're the Antichrist when they have a psychotic break. Like you
Oh,
are
interesting. You
experiencing something
were
that is
armed.
probably not like real. And so for about 5 days, I had to hold like two realities in my hands.
Uh-huh.
And one was like that I was the Antichrist, and the other was like, you're probably not the Antichrist. You have to figure out how to make sure that you know that you're not the Antichrist. Um, and like one of the like I could talk about this forever. Again, we don't have a lot of time, but like in terms of like weighting information, is it's just like if you're weighting thoughts or imagined thoughts more heavily than you're weighting sensory information that you're experiencing with your eyes, nose, hands,
Yeah,
then you can create a reality that
totally.
feels very real, but is in fact based more on fantasy than it is actually based off of sensory information that's coming in through your eyes.
And we all do that, right? Just if we're just in our own thoughts and we're just brooding, and then we
Yep.
create this dark tale of what someone thinks of us, of our job, whatever it is. We do this all the time, to a lesser extent than
Yeah.
the story you're telling, which is also interesting because in those situations, personally, I also need to arm myself with, wait, do I have anything that's actually telling me this is true? Did I get enough sleep? Just the basic things
Mm-hmm.
of mood. But please continue.
Yeah, and so for me, I really started realizing, like, I mean, I obviously already have, I call it a squishy brain, right? Like, I know I have a squishy brain, right? And I am more, I am basically more susceptible to things like this. And
Hmm.
so what I had done through the way that I had started to change my perception of reality was I had basically taken down some of the safeguards that like hold my brain together and made my brain more squishy so that then when I did have an experience that can induce psychosis, in which having a weed edible that someone had made themselves that I had no idea how much THC was
Oh,
in,
wow.
right?
Okay.
Like I was more susceptible to having an experience that was a complete break with reality.
Hmm.
And
Right.
this really started getting me thinking about psychedelics and how we use them and the dangers of these experiences along with the benefits, right? Because when you're deconstructing and reconstructing your reality, you can do amazing things. You can help people get over depression. You can help people
Hmm.
change their minds. You can help reduce any number of problems because everything is about our perception. And if you have the tools to alter perception, you can change anything. But you can also change anything, which means
Hmm.
that you can also go in the other direction. And for
Hmm.
people, especially people with vulnerabilities like me, you can create circumstances in which people are being exposed to a greater number of harms. Um, and so I started to really dive into this. Psychedelics are something that are important to me, obviously. I mean, they're also something that I think from the story, it is evident that I need to be very careful with. And I think that both can be true, right? I think that it's really hard because there's a lot of people in the camp who are just like, no, these are some of the safest substances out there. Like everybody can do this. These are great. Everyone should be dropping acid all the time. And then you have the other people who are like, no, people with mental health problems should never do psychedelics. Like this is horrible. And it's just like, again, this is me speaking as me, not as a clinician anymore, because I'm not
Okay.
licensed anyway. But just like as me, like I think it's a lot more nuanced. And but I
Hmm.
also think that we need a lot more caution. And so I got together with a friend of mine. His name's Alex Belzer. He's a big name in queer psychedelics. He actually just edited a book called Queering Psychedelic, which is out now. And I worked with him at Cybin. We worked at a psychedelic startup for a while, helping to design clinical trials and work like that. And so I had coffee with him one day in March, and we were just talking about this stuff. And he looks at me and he's just like, Flux, he's like, I feel like we're giving people nuclear bombs for their brains.
Huh.
And he's like, and I don't know what to do about it. And I looked at him and I said, Alex, I don't think it's that we're giving people nuclear bombs. I think it's that psychedelics are basically like plutonium. And I was like, and what can you do with plutonium? Plutonium can be used to create a nuclear reactor that like powers a nuclear power plant that like powers an entire city with like fairly clean burning energy. Or it can be used to create a nuclear bomb. And I was like, we need to be really careful about the way that we are delivering these substances and encouraging their use so that we're not creating nuclear bombs and are instead creating nuclear power plants.
Mhm.
And so around that time, I got a call, not a call. No, I had met a guy. That was it. I had met this guy at a party in December. His name was Tristan Bennett. And he is in the, or no, I think he graduated. He was in the social worker program at NYU and is very into psychedelics. And we had like a good networking talk, and then out of nowhere I just texted him because I hadn't talked to him in a couple months, and I was like, hey, just reaching out, like, how are you? And he messaged me back, and he was just like, I'm kind of going through it right now. And I was like, oh, do you need like some space to talk about something? And he tells me this story of just like horrific sexual abuse that happens in the psychedelic world.
Oh, wow.
And I won't get into the details of it, but it was shocking. And and he was just like, I don't really know what to do about this. And I mean, it messed me up when he told me this story. It was really bad.
Yeah.
And I was just like, could you, like, I was like, give me a minute. And then I kind of came back and I was just like, hey, can I just like blow up your phone for a bit? And he was like, well, just send me an email. So I sent him this email that's like this 10-paragraph takedown about like why this was not appropriate and like why we need strong ethics around sexual contact in the context of psychedelic healing. And immediately afterward, he was like, will you give the keynote at our conference? And I was like, okay.
Fun.
And so on April 22nd, I give this keynote about the ethics of sex and its involvement with psychedelic healing circles in the context of therapy. And it was very well received. And it's just, you know, I started really getting hardcore into ethics and into like, what are we doing here? And it's like, because there are a lot of ways as I've started diving into this, that I'm realizing that this is the way that psychedelics are getting popularized, not just popularized, but legalized and legislated in our country is starting to set us up for some really scary failure.
Oh, interesting.
And so that talk that I gave in April got me connected with the state of Colorado. And I've been doing some like very light consulting work with them. There's like hundreds of people on this, so it's not like I'm doing a whole lot. But like I've been doing some light consulting work around the legislature that they passed, right? So Colorado passed this it's basically like a plant medicine act, and it does two things. And these two things are the scary part. One is it legalizes the use of plant medicine, psilocybin in this case, in the treatment of treatment-resistant depression and PTSD in government-run healing centers. But then it also does this in parallel with decriminalization. Now, I'll talk about why this makes me nervous. If I had had my way in the way that all of the legalization stuff in this country had gone, it would have been just decriminalization. It would not have been legitimizing it in parallel with mental health treatments. Because it's not that I don't think that psychedelics can't be solid treatments for mental health. It's that it takes a really delicate touch, especially with individuals like me who are, have a mind that is squishy. And the dangers are, the psychotic breaks and the thinking that we're the Antichrist. And I'll tell you that not everyone who has this experience is going to have the clinical training that I had that allowed me to walk my way back from thinking that I was the Antichrist.
And so even if it's in a government facility, if somebody who's
that's not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about is that the government facility is for two use cases: treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. What about all of the people who now hear that these substances are wonder drugs for mental health, who either cannot access government facilities, cannot access people to guide them, but it's happening in parallel with decriminalization, which means that they're going to have access to them through a gray market.
Which means is already something I hear from customers at the shop. This is something I hear. I know there are podcasts talking about it, and it does just seem like green light. We're on. We're good to go. Yeah.
We're on. We're good to go. So I take a very harm reduction approach to this. Right? Like I'm not trying to be the next war on drugs. I don't think that that would work. I think that that's a bad idea.
Happy to hear
So,
that.
so then the question is, if we're existing in this framework and we suddenly have a lot of people who want to do psychedelics,
Mhm.
many of whom are at risk for potentially dangerous experiences,
Mhm.
how do we design a system that allows them to do psychedelics in a way that minimizes the negative impact of potentially unraveling their minds? And so I designed a system.
Please allow. Oh, is this something you're going to share today, or is this a teaser for the Float conference? I'd
This
love to
is
hear.
this is what I'll be talking about at the
All
Float
right, all
conference.
right, cool.
So I basically said, how would you do this? And I got inspiration from several different places. The first was game mechanics, because not that I wanted to turn doing psychedelics into a game, because I think that that's probably that doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But using the mechanics of games to engineer an experience that minimizes the negative impact of psychedelics. Now, that was something that really interested me. And then I got inspiration from another place that was completely unlikely and came out of left field, AA. Alcoholics Anonymous is one of the most interesting sets of mental programming in existence, in that it's not for everyone, right? I'm not an AA evangelist, but like when I started talking to someone in AA who was very knowledgeable about the system, and he let me ask him questions for like hours and hours. And I realized, I was like, oh, this is basically the 12 steps are mental programming. They're a way to create a mentality that is resistant to addiction. And it's one of the reasons why AA and other 12-step programs have been so effective, is because they use game mechanics in a very specific way to create a mental environment that is less susceptible to addiction. Now, it doesn't work for everyone. It is kind of weird, which I will give it, but it's also highly effective for the people that it works for. And so I wanted to create a system that was not AA, but that used kind of mechanics that was basically built around a minimal step system that people could utilize to engage with psychedelics in ways that would minimize the potential for a negative outcome, while also facilitating growth and change in ways that was approachable.
And this is for any state where it's decriminalized, essentially, or legalized to
The thing
self-administer?
is that it's not for psychedelics. It's for any altered state. It is for any altered state of consciousness, which is why I realized that it could be just as easily applied to floating.
Great. And we're there. Great.
And so I decided to talk about that this year at the Float Conference.
Cool. And then how are you planning on releasing this system?
Oh, it's just a series of steps in the same way that, AA is 12 steps. The story of AA is really interesting, and I've gotten a lot from it, in that AA actually started in the 30s. And when it was first released, just as the initial steps, it went off the rails. It was used to create cults. There were prohibition cults. It was used for people to just extort people and abuse people. It went off the rails. And so in the 50s, they kept the 12 steps, but they added the 12 concepts and the 12 traditions. And the interesting thing about the 12 concepts and the 12 traditions is that they are basically the guide rails that brought the 12 steps back in line so that it wouldn't go off the rails in the way that it did in the 30s and 40s. And so when I was designing this system, I looked a lot at how the 12 steps was complemented by the 12 concepts and the 12 traditions in the way that it basically attenuated the mental programming so that it wouldn't go off the rails. So what I've essentially made is currently it's just a 10-step system. But the mechanics of that system have been exquisitely designed, and you can't tell because it just looks like it's just basic, it's just words, right? You're just following guidelines.
Right.
I need to actually use it more. I've used it with a couple people. It needs to be refined, but I want to basically kind of use the float community potentially. I want to offer it to the float community and be like, hey, this is still cooking, but like,
Hmm.
what do you think? Like, and get feedback and see
Cool.
what
All
people,
right.
whether people like it. Because it's basically a system for journeying. And that journeying can happen with a psychedelic, or it can happen through a drum circle, or it can happen in a float tank, or it can
Hmm.
happen with holotropic breath work.
Hmm.
It's, I'm tentatively calling it Journey Space. I don't know if I like that name yet, but that's kind of that's what it's called currently.
Okay.
But it's just about how do you journey in a way that minimizes the potential for harm.
Fascinating. I love that. I'm so excited to hear about that in person. My mom and I have a conversation, and I suppose my dad as well, kind of slow and ongoing over the years of, I'm a fan of psychedelics and kind of breaking up the mind periodically and taking a fresh look with psychedelics. And my parents, as raised Buddhist, and they're still Buddhist, chant. And my mom will say, like, I can achieve a psychedelic experience
Mm-hmm.
through chanting. And I'm like, Mom, it's not the same, you know? And she's like, well,
Mm.
yeah. And now, based off this conversation, I'm leaning more in her camp. But what I'm really curious about is to um, how these steps would apply to each of us in our separate states, and making them positive and functional is really exciting to me. So I'm personally invested here. I'm interested. Can I also just going back? I just want to say
Yeah, yeah.
thanks for your sharing and vulnerability. I always appreciate that so much. While your story was very specific, I also just think so many of us are going through the 7 year or whatever the cycle truly is. You know, the questioning of who am I? I think that's constantly going on with so many people, and if it's not, perhaps it should be. But yeah, that's something I'm currently facing now. Like I've wanted to be an archaeologist, I've wanted to be a teacher, I've wanted to be a business owner, or float center owner, and these things are constantly churning in my head. And the who am I? So I just appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that strikes home for so many of us, and must have for every single person listening, because we all came here from a certain place of questioning. So I appreciate that. Um, let's see here. There are a few things. Is there well, first of all, yeah, I guess we are kind of coming to a close here. I should wrap up. Is there anything else you want to share before we start wrapping up here? I feel like you've had a
I
great arc of getting all the
I
way
know.
to the float and your presentation. That was bravo.
I would say the I am working on rebranding. I think I'm going to be trying to move towards an area of content creation, book writing, stuff like that. I'm
Hmm.
working on trying to make money doing some Uber driving, which has been interesting. I kind of love it. I really like
Nice.
driving people places. But the thing is that like what I really came down to, if I had to figure out what my brand would be, because apparently
Yeah.
we all have to think about that, but like kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't like, even if we don't use the word brand, but what who am I came up with the word resilience, because the thing is that like I've gone through a lot, and I keep coming back fighting, and I want whatever I create and put out into the world to be about resilience. And this system is about resilience. It's how can we use a substance or use an experience that has the potential for danger and still use it in such a way that we are able to grow and to heal and to move forward. And so I have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. I just am experimenting with a TikTok channel about resilience. I'm going to probably start moving into Instagram as well, and I have some ideas for YouTube. But keep an eye out for resilience and me, and that's, I think, going to be the thing for the next 7 years. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Awesome. Damn it. You're gonna make me install TikTok on my phone.
I don't use it. I just make content.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're finally motivating me to do that. And then are you going to try out Threads as well?
Probably. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
I'm still trying to, I mean, I'm yeah, I feel like I'm coming out of a period of a lot of unrest. That's a whole other story, but like the past couple months of my life have just been mentally very challenging. So a lot of this has all come out of resilience in general. So I'm looking forward to kind of the next arc being me having a little bit more energy to work on this stuff. So
Got it. Cool. Um, several times during this conversation, I've wanted to ask, but it seemed like such a pause of the conversation I held off, which is, floating, cool, research, cool, yada, yada, yada. You as a human being, the most important thing, right? And so when you have a breakdown, if you have a mental episode, if you're having just a tough time, do you like people reaching out to you? Do you like people in the float community reaching out to you? Do you prefer just a core group of friends and family? You know, can we support you in any way? I know there's several questions there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this question is going to be coming up a lot, especially as I make my life more public, or at least parts of it
Mm.
more public. So I have to figure out how to answer these questions. I mean, the thing is that I have designed a support system. You know, I don't know. It's hard to say exactly, but like my level of like mental health issues, like the fact that I am like have done this much and I'm still standing and I'm still alive is kind of like really surprising.
Mm.
Like I have a very, very, very intense and challenging mood disorder. Um, it's, you know, I could talk about this forever, but I'll just say like it's very, very hard. And the way that I have kept going and stayed alive has been through having very specific people in my life with very specific instructions on very specific ways about how to support me. I think for other people, it often just gets more challenging when they try. You know, like I have a core of maybe like 5 different people who all have different roles, who play different roles that are able to do things. And generally, when I am collapsing, I have enough lead time that I'm able to get myself somewhere to get myself safe.
Okay.
And that has happened every time so far. And I would say
Okay.
the past 6 months of my life have been probably some of the most challenging mental health
Yeah.
months of my life. And so, like, for me, my priorities are personal safety, my own life, and safety of others. So, like, I have so many systems in play that make sure that those things are prioritized. And it's very complicated. So I would say if you want to help, just give me some grace and, you know, ask me if I need anything and, you know, respect whatever I say
Sure.
in
Great.
response to that.
Perfect. Sounds great. All right. Thank you for joining, Dr. Flux.
Absolutely.
Always a wonderful conversation. Um, as you're talking about, while you were talking, I was like, you need a YouTube channel. You need to be writing a book. But also
it's
just
in the works.
yeah, that's great. That's perfect. And you need a podcast as well. You need a way to be
That is also
sharing
in the
and
works.
great,
I am
perfect.
my friend Mara. So I have this famous friend, or used to be famous friend. Do you know the movie Matilda?
Uh-huh.
Do you remember the actress who played Matilda?
I can picture her. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
her name is Mara Wilson. She's a very good friend of
Okay,
mine, and we are in the
nice.
process of trying to put together a
Oh,
podcast about
yay, fun.
something. So,
That's
so,
something. Okay, great.
so hopefully that'll happen soon. I'm gunning for us to make a resilience podcast where we talk about this
Mhm.
stuff because she
Cool.
also
Excellent.
is someone who is has a lot of challenging mental health. She has dealt with OCD. She's done public
Mm.
speaking about it across the country. She deals with a lot of physical health issues, and so I just think it would be a really cool thing for us to do together. So we'll see what happens.
I love it. Let me know. Let me know when you guys launch, and
Yeah.
we'll plug it here and have both of you on. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Let's see here. The Float Conference is August 18th through the 20th. I'll be there. Flux is going to be there, obviously, and I think we're both open for hugs. So come say hello.
Yes.
Apparently,
many hugs.
if you buy Flux a drink, you get to hear even more. So everybody buy him a
Deconstruct
drink.
reality.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll be hosting a bunch of roundtables on Friday. That's going to be fun. I think Gloria's going to be doing that as well. It's going to be a good time. Can't wait to see everybody there. As always, I don't even know how many float conferences there is. This 14, 15, something like that. It's bananas. But come out, say hi. Obviously, there's tons of information to learn, but the community aspect is also just the most important part. To me, the most important part. And I think that's what people walk away with so much of is we're all isolated throughout the year. And this is just a great way to network, team build, friends build, and have connections throughout the rest of the year between float conferences that help you, well, thrive, to lack of a better term. Oh, also, I should say, and go to floatconference.com to get your tickets. I want to see you there. How emotions are made. I'll put a link So you can pick that up if you like.
It's a
That was
very
Lisa Feldman
challenging
Barrett.
book to read, but it's
Okay,
really
well,
good.
good advertisement. Great for anybody who's up for a challenge. Just so you know, it'll be there. Did you want to plug Queering Psychedelics as well, or was that a little?
Oh yeah, sure. I
Yeah,
mean, I
cool.
haven't read it. I have not read
Oh,
it,
okay,
but
okay,
I respect Alex Belzer immensely.
great.
So
We're gonna put it up there just so you have access to it if you want to check it out. And there was something. Oh yeah, go to shop.artofthefloat.com. Flux and I did. Gosh, has it been a couple of years now, or is it just a year? Either way, Dr. Flux was talking about creating graphics and being an artist. There's some really cool float graphic designs for t-shirts that you can check out on shop.artofthefloat. Look for the Flux design logo, and you'll know which ones are his. And yeah, I love mine, and I'd love to see other people wearing those as well. Let's see here. I think that's it. Of course, thanks to our sponsors, and yeah, thanks to the FTA, thanks to Float Tank Solutions, and gosh, I Flex, I'll see you at the conference. I'll see everybody at the
can't wait.
conference.
See everybody at
All
the
right.
conference. Say hello.
Bye, everybody.